I'm Robin Truslow. I am the chair of the fundraising committee, and I'm on the ACLT board. So I am super excited about this new perk we have added for you major donors, this quarterly update. So it's a great chance to hear what's going on at ACLT, what the update is, and ask any questions you might have of our executive director. I think you probably all know Greg Bowen, but I'm going to turn it over to Greg to share the update. Thanks.
I'm excited for the opportunity to chat with you folks. I am going to try to share my screen. And let's see. Obviously, I've got to start with a screen of Parker's Creek Watershed. So things are good at ACLT. We are proactive, and we're getting things done. The board's land and stewardship campaign reached its goal, and there's enough money to fund all of the projects. As you may know, that first one on the left, the Oak property, we have now purchased. Really excited to have that as another property in our fold. The land management staff and volunteers are maintaining the trails and tending the farm and removing invasives such as that wavy leaf basket grass that you see in the lower right. And land management work is informed by science, including the water quality blitz, which involved 49 citizen scientists in 4 major watersheds covering 53,000 acres of Calvert County, including the most studied Parker's Creek and Governor's Run. And this year, ACLT released the first ever report card for the watersheds with good overall health. And the message we've been also putting out there is we need to be the example. Land trusts need to be the example in reducing our carbon footprint and moving away from carbon sources for what we do. And so we're changing our fleet slowly, more battery operated equipment. Outreach and memberships, 12 hikes in 12 months challenge attracted over 2,000 hikers last year, connecting even more people to the land. And we had very successful winter Volksmarch and a spring leprechaun hunt this year. And we've got coming up the Sip and Save in September and the Parker's Creek Challenge in October. There have also been some major successes that we participated in with the advocacy at the state level. And that's under the leadership of Forever Maryland, a relatively new organization that is a voice for all land trusts in Maryland. Including in that legislation is the most ambitious greenhouse reductions of any state in the nation that got passed, along with tougher enforcement and a climate change core. And then at the local level, some major policy successes. Look at the map on the left. The area in blue is new rural legacy areas around Hunting Creek. And then if you will look at that orange just south of Parker's Creek, you see that they've added in more of the land in our watershed and also some land going down the road down below that, Brooms Island Road. But maybe the biggest thing happened at the local level was finally we've seen success with reducing the projected size of Prince Frederick. Board of County Commissioners, 4 of them have agreed to eliminate plans for phase 2 expansion of Prince Frederick, which would have been a horrible thing over land that should not be developed and would have caused so much more traffic where we don't have a place for cars. All of this part of our efforts to maintain Parker's Creek as a pristine watershed. So why is all of this important? The US has 2 of the world's biodiversity hotspots that being most species, high percentage of species, and most threatened. And we are in one of them, the North American coastal plain. And the Maryland Wildlife Action Plan is intended to protect the species threatened by development and climate change. And guess what? Maryland biodiversity maps identify tier 1 through tier 5 as the bionet areas, the most significant areas in the state, red being number 1. And if you look at that red arrow, the tier 1 area in Calvert County is Parker's Creek. And that is due to a lot of the work of all of you to protect those areas and the degree to which those areas are protected. But then also look in that oval area that's dashed in red, and you see that Southern Maryland has a lot of hotspots, either tier 1 through tier 5. And if you compare that with central Northern Maryland and much of the Eastern Shore, we have more of the most significant areas for protection in the state. Then you zoom in to Parker's Creek, that huge red area, but you'll also notice that there's purple, there's blue, there's green, and all those areas are considered significant sensitive areas that have a wide level of diversity at this time. So much in need of preservation. The Nature Conservancy agrees. If you look at their resiliency map, they take a look at the a number of things to determine what's so important, including soils, hydrology, elevation, microclimates, and land use. And they've identified almost all of Calvert County as highly resilient, and much of Southern Maryland as well as one level of resilient lands. If you look at the browns and the grays, those have little or no resiliency, according to Nature Conservancy. All of that makes it so important that last year we formed the Southern Maryland Conservation Alliance to advocate for the protection of lands in the 5-county region. Imagine this, 35 nonprofits working together for the protection of these precious ecological areas. And in addition to that, though, it's very significant that to the extent that Southern Maryland is now eligible for more grants, and U.S. and Fish and Wildlife is actually proposing to expand its area of interest to all of Southern Maryland. To be successful, though, we need to be sure that Maryland's legislature is engaged and support these conservation efforts too. So we're going to be working with Forever Maryland to see that that happens. Now, if you look at the map, this is called Maryland's Protected Lands Dashboard of all the different land conservation approaches in Maryland. And you do see that there's a lot of green. There's also a lot of yellow on the map. And that happens to be areas that are priority areas for development. It's either developed or intended for development. And then take a look at this and you will see just how much that has changed since 1973. This map that I'm showing you shows all of the land developed, and it was 10.5% in 1973. And that was before most of the land preservation programs were developed. But look at 2010, 27% now in 2010 was land area developed. And look at how much of it was on the central Maryland and a significant part in Southern Maryland. But look throughout the state and you'll see a lot of dots, lots of new subdivision development that's happened in rural areas. Now, this land use map, also prepared by state planning, shows new development between 1973 and 2010. The areas, the dots that you see that are brown, are those subdivisions and developments that happened in that 37-year period. Again, so much more development moving out of cities and out of inner suburbs and into places that shouldn't actually be developed, over 1 million acres. So sprawl's impacts are and can be phenomenal. Higher infrastructure costs per residential unit, increased vehicle miles traveled, congestion, air pollution, and demand for new roads, loss and fragmentation of forest land, decreasing ecological diversity, etc., converting of ag land and diminishing the viability of operating ag uses, decreasing water quality and biodiversity, and increasing carbon emissions and reducing the carbon sequestration as forests are removed. Something that we don't have to say is inevitable, something that we can do something about. But sprawl is bad enough. Now we're seeing the impacts of climate change. Higher temperatures, more invasive, wilder temperature fluctuations, bigger, slower moving storms, creating what we're looking at right now, and that is stream banks that are being eroded throughout all of the watersheds in Maryland. So we are very fortunate, ACLT is, to get this grant from anonymous sources. It's a challenge grant, and we can talk about that later. It's a challenge grant with 4 major components, and they include to support the efforts of Southern Maryland Conservation Alliance, to expand ACLT's capacity to address climate change on its lands, to connect protected lands and communities throughout with access ways, hiking trails, biking trails, and even wildlife corridors, and to increase member engagement. So what is the board proposing to do with this money? We're supporting to do just what the first item was listed there, and that is to establish more friends groups, friends watershed groups throughout Southern Maryland, support U.S. and Fish and Wildlife in its plans to expand areas of interest for all of Southern Maryland. That could bring a lot of conservation money to Southern Maryland, and maintain a dynamic database and outreach strategy to keep elected officials and citizens informed. You see there Mary Hoover, and Mary is going to be our regional coordinator for this effort. And then with our new assistant land manager, Clara Brill-Carlott, we will expand ACLT's capacity to address climate change on its lands by monitoring change in streams, forests, marshes, meadows, and wildlife, creating beaver dam analogs and conducting research on their effectiveness, combating invasives, and helping to plan for wildlife corridors and hiking and biking trails. Look at, we have beavers here already, and you see their work to the right. But beaver dam analogs are not something that's brand new. Western states have been replicating the work of beavers, and that work is called the analogs for decades. And often beavers move in afterwards to keep those dams going. Beaver dams slow water flow, they settle out silt, they build wetlands, and they provide a cool place for critters to come in droughts or a heat wave, just like what we are experiencing now. And then the next big component is hiking and biking and wildlife corridors. With that, we're going to seek assistance from the National Park Service. They happen to be experts in this, getting these set up, designing, and building. We'll be working with them, and I've already made connections with the county and state agencies in getting something like this started. So this will be an exciting new project with the grant monies. So now I ask all of you a special question, and this is a conversation that we've just begun with land trusts throughout Southern Maryland and the state. How much land should we preserve? Nobody else has seen these statistics for, but I put these together for Southern Maryland Conservation Alliance. Realize this, 1.8 million acres have been preserved through all the state and county land preservation tools and through parkland that's been preserved by fed, state, or local. That's 29% of the state's landmass. However, 1.8 roughly has been developed, and that has been growing even a little faster than preservation has. And there's 2.6 million acres of land that is uncommitted. And a lot of that will go up for sale in the next 10 years. And some of it is going up for sale now. What should be our goal? Should we try to save 30% by 2030, 40% by 2040, or more? So where do we go to for information on this? Well, the World Conservation Congress has had a group that has been focused on this issue for many years. And their conclusion is that in our world, we need to protect 50% of lands and seas with a minimum of 30% by 2030. If we are going to keep our species, areas, habitat, and so forth intact, and begin to address climate change as our species and wildlife and all are moving northward about 11 miles every 10 years, according to the Nature Conservancy. So as we protect more lands, based on what's going on in the world, what should we be protecting? Well, the focus has been historically ag lands, and I think it's still going to be a major importance. But we don't want to preserve a quilt work of preservation and development. If we're going to preserve these areas, we need to preserve large intact areas. Or should it be access to nature, particularly in urban areas? If we're going to stop residential sprawl, we need to make our more urban areas the best places to live and work and shop. And to do that, you need to have nature where people live as well. Is it to protect more green and blue infrastructure, such as what we're looking at here in our own watersheds? And those green and blue infrastructure is defined in Maryland's new legislation. Is it establishing more wildlife corridors? You know, major roads and subdivisions break up wildlife corridors and they have nowhere to go during climate change. And so experts are looking at different ways that we can maintain corridors, and we can actually do that in Calvert County. So I have thrown a ton at you. This is what we're doing, and this is what our efforts have been, and this is what we have the capacity to do now, we believe, with this new capacity grant. We're protecting our watersheds and new land preservation efforts we're going to roll out by the end of the year. We're having a stronger voice locally, regionally, and statewide. We're increasing our level of stewardship and increasing membership. So with that, I pulled out just a few slides that you might say, whoa, Greg, you've covered too much. Please answer some questions on this. These are just some possible talking points, but I'm here to answer your questions.
And you can unmute and ask your questions, or you can raise your hand and I'll see that. At least I think I will. I can call on you that way. And if y'all don't have immediate questions, I could ask you one question based on what he's just talked about. We have a question about that goal that's been set. I'm going to launch it and let y'all answer. Is everyone seeing the question?
Well, can I mention something? Calvert County has a goal for how much land we're going to preserve. And I think we're sort of well on the way towards getting there. And maybe sometimes you think, well, it's impossible, we're never going to do it, but it looks like Calvert County is doing a good job. So why not the whole state?
Good. All right, well, we have 10 people who've answered. I'll end it and let y'all see what the results are. I don't know if y'all were seeing them as they were being answered or not. I can't remember if I said that or not. So let's see. There's the results. Most people think we can do it. So there you go. Good. Thanks. And other questions that have come up that are in there, or should I ask myself? I also have a couple more polls I could do. One of them's related to what we just did, and that's how do we pursue this 50% goal? Or if we do it, what, and do you want to hear more details about it? Feel free to answer that question for us. Because like I say, we hope to be doing this about once a quarter. And thanks, Pat Hoffman, for setting a schedule for us. Now, I'll let y'all know too, the next one is scheduled for October 30th, which is also a Sunday at 4 o'clock. Feel free to pencil it in, but you'll get an invite.
We haven't had any questions yet on the what U.S. Fish and Wildlife is doing, but that what the map that you're looking at has involved a huge amount of research. We're looking to see what species are where, which ones are threatened and endangered. And in one of those slides, I showed the ones that do happen to be already endangered federally and or statewide. And so Fish and Wildlife really is interested, particularly in the Patuxent River corridor, in Nanjemoy area, but you'll see a lot of activity happening around the body masses as well. The dots point out various species that are specifically at risk or areas for it.
All right. This is the answer. Most people like a brief, and Robin has a question. Brief overview for the 50% for sure. So we'll make sure that's on the list. And Robin, you want to answer your question?
Yes, thanks. Thanks, Greg, for the details. I have to admit I'm swimming in details. So I'm not quite following everything that's going on. What I'm wondering is, with this matrix that you put together, where does Maryland stand? I'm not sure what that means for Calvert County or what that means for the ACLT. I mean, it sounds great to just throw a pin at it someplace, but I'm not sure what that means for local action. Can you help me with that?
So a couple of things. Number one, if we get more federal funds come in, we may be able to pick up more money for Calvert County to protect wildlife corridors and properties that are within wildlife corridors, or stretch out the protected areas, and particularly around Parker's Creek, because it's already been identified as a hub for wildlife species, fish, and certainly in a big way, birds. And so then if we can grow out from those areas, then we can make even a larger core area for species. And then also connect them potentially all the way up to Anne Arundel County.
Question, Robin? Maybe not.
Yeah, sorry. So the $100,000 challenge grant, tell us more about that, and how does that fit into this? And does that challenge grant include money to purchase more land, or is it, remind me how that will be used?
Okay. So what the grant funders wanted to do was to allow us to continue what we're already doing. Okay. And so we're actually going to maintain the funds separately. We're not really changing our budget significantly to take on the new projects. We're using the challenge grant for that. And so the challenge grant will cover Clara's salary, and will cover Mary's salary, and some of the other stuff that we're working on to do the specific things that the board has decided are consistent with our mission to try to protect a broader area of Southern Maryland, which is part of our 5-year plan. So I mean, I think it can have direct and indirect impacts, because I think we may be eligible for more funding to protect more lands within our watersheds and adjacent to our watersheds, and help support neighboring watersheds like Hunting Creek, St. Leonard, Battle Creek, et cetera.
And Greg, there's some questions in the chat. I'm going to call on Kathy though, because she has her hand raised, and then we'll get to the questions that are written in the chat. So Kathy, you want to unmute and ask your question?
Okay, thanks, Robin. I'm particularly interested in the wildlife corridors concept because so much research is showing that we need a lot of land, but that we can do a lot by linking a good land and providing corridors. David and I went to the conference on quail habitat restoration, and we got really discouraged because we thought, no one's going to be able to do this. It's too many acres. But then they said, well, actually, if you just connect good locations, that you can do it. So you can do it with 1 to 10 acres. And so we got excited about that. So I like the idea of looking into wildlife corridors. And I know a lot of good research is being done. I think the Park Service and Nature Conservancy have done a lot of good work on that.
Yeah.
That's a really great. Oh, sorry.
I'm glad you're doing that.
And I think that's a really great lead into the question that Dawn asks, because she said, Greg, could you talk a little bit about conservation easements instead of actual land purchasing?
Right. So what we're seeing is, Maryland conservation easements have been evolving. It started out, it was just an effort to preserve land because we were losing so much farmland. But in about 20 years ago, with the formation of the Rural Legacy Program, they started giving value to landowners who would be willing to maintain buffers, maintain corridors, maintain wetland areas. And so properties actually get value added even more than what the appraised value is if they are willing to take on these conservation restrictions. And what we're seeing more, though, is that may be a trend that we're going to see more diverse conservation easements where landowners are paid for preservation, that was so far beyond what it was. So we might be going back to some of the existing ag districts through the state program and say, well, if you're willing to maintain a buffer along this stream, you might be eligible for additional funding. And so we think that could be a very powerful tool to make that happen. And it costs a whole lot less than buying a whole property. Another aspect to it that we're looking at is we don't have to own everything. We have a lot of property owners who want to maintain the property land themselves, and that's just as good. We have a couple of major landowners in our own watershed that own it and provide great stewardship. So if we just buy an easement instead of a property, or buy a property, put an easement on it, and then resell it, put it in private hands, we're accomplishing the goal at a whole much lower cost. So,
and you might have seen too that the challenge grant really is, it builds capacity to reach out more, to grow our members, to do more advocacy, to get the word out there about the possibility of impact and what we can do. And that will hopefully lead more landowners to us to say, how do we do this? How do we make this happen? I see Karen has a question about, is there any thought about doing more of a corridor along the Patuxent River, including Landing Calvert?
The answer is absolutely. Fish and Wildlife has its eye on that for a lot of reasons, because that's such an important waterway, and it's threatened. And so getting a corridor established there now will probably be one of Fish and Wildlife's biggest priorities.
Any other looming questions? I'll ask one. I have one more poll question when we created this. Oh, okay. Go ahead, Dale.
Hey, Greg, can you provide a little more detail as to the extent and nature of what the involvement of the Park Service would be?
So the Park Service is they use their planning resources. So in other words, they've done it throughout the country. And what they do is they compile best practices. And so they will be working with us if we get the grant, and we've worked pretty well towards getting that grant next year. They will work with us side by side, bringing in ideas and approaches that have been done other ways, either by the federal government or by other groups that they've worked with, to say, these are the best tools for accomplishing your goals.
Great, thanks.
Mhm.
So my question is around sort of this format. You're welcome. I'm going to post actually the email address. You can provide your feedback. I put it in the chat. If you want to let us know how you thought this went, how you think we should do differently, if there's certain topics you think we should cover. But this idea was introduced by another donor who said it's really a great way to update our major donors so they can see where their money's going. Is it having an impact? And so that's what we wanted to do. And I think in the past we've thought, oh, we have the newsletter, we're sending out this update once a quarter. And the poll I want to ask is, are you reading it? Like, do you read it? I know I'm guilty of, I get too much email. I don't always read it. So I just wanted to see among you guys how that email works for y'all, how that e-newsletter works. It looks like a lot of people are following it. Great. Most people have answered. I'll show you. Most people read it cover to cover. So that's good news. I'm the only rarely open the email. Eek. So that's good. So we'll continue to use that method to communicate, but you guys also get this extra bonus of a special donor update. Any other questions? We promise not to keep you too long, so I won't keep you if nobody has anything else today.
Thank you. This was really helpful.
Wonderful. Thank you all for coming, and we look forward to seeing you again on October 30th, and of course at the events that Greg mentioned.
Thank you for
Bye.
keeping us informed.
Thanks for the update.
Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.